Subscribe notifications.
Degenesis The Righteous Fist is the first of a 2-book setting expansion for the Degenesis role-playing game, published by SixMoreVodka in early 2021. The 2-book series is titled Justitian, named after the capital city of the setting's great northern bastion of civilization 600 years after an apocalypse. This book, The Righteous Fist, details not only the city of Justitian and all of its areas of interest, leadership, operations, and secrets, but also the entire sprawl of the Protectorate, that sole empire in what is left of Europe, which is co-governed by 3 factions, or cults as the game calls them. If you haven't checked out my previous 3-part series on Degenesis, consider watching those first. They cover the 2 core rule books of the game as well as its rules expansion. I'll put the links to those below. If you'd rather just jump into Degenesis from this video, that's fine too. I just want to point out a few things about this video first. 1, this is the first of a 3-video series, the first covering The Righteous Fist, the second covering Moloch, which is Justitian Book 2. Moloch explores a complex tapestry of interweaving stories from the perspective of dozens of NPCs, and in doing so advances the metaplot of the Degenesis setting. The 3rd video will cover about half a dozen or so booklets published after Justitian, which each further expand the setting and metaplot. These booklets are the last material ever to be published for Degenesis, as SixMoreVodka announced in October 2021 that there would be no more new content. 2. This video will cover as much pertinent bird's eye view information of The Righteous Fist as possible, including spoilers, but will not cover information found in books covering later events in the timeline, or even the 2nd Justitian book, Moloch. It will inherently include information from the 2 core rule books, Primal Punk and Catharsis. Again, it might grease the wheels a bit if you watch those videos first, but it's not a requirement. 3, as usual, I'll give a neutral run through and then add my honest opinion at the end of the video. I get into more detail in the previous videos, but basically the setting of Degenesis starts in the year 2595, 5 centuries after a series of meteors devastated Earth and wiped out most life on the surface, save for Europe and Northern Africa. The meteors brought with them 6 distinct mutational scourges called chakras that each manifest in unborn children and harbor one kind of unique supernatural power or another. There is also hyper-deadly grass-like plants that have closed off most of Africa, but also unite it through an ancestral language that spreads like a disease. As far as the humans in the remaining habitable regions of Earth, they have divided themselves into cults. There are 13 cults, but they aren't all equal. In one category, there are the 3 African cults, which are harmonized with each other in a flourishing merchant empire. Then there are Palers, who in the metaplot of the setting are most easily described as villains. The Palers' own mental programming and technology give them the blueprint for humanity's future, but one that is at odds with everyone else's. Then there are clans, which include countless settlements and tribal collections, large and small. Some are peaceful and docile, while others are more warlike. The most outrageously hostile and violent of these clans have joined forces and risen against organized civilization in Northern Europe. And that leaves the last bucket of cults, which each have their own origins and motives, but who have all thrown their hat into the ring of the Protectorate in one way or another. The Protectorate is a fragile empire ruled by just 3 of these cults, and whose capital city sits in the northern region of Borca, the one last region in all of the habitable world that is relatively free of the plague called the Primer, which was brought by the meteors. No chakra managed to awaken and take hold in this region. This capital city is named Justitian, and it's what this 2-book series covers in the year 2598, 3 years after the start of the setting as launched from the core rulebooks. Justitian comes as a 2-book set, and in physical form, it is presented in a slipcase. Each of the books is a stitch-bound hardback that runs about 300 pages and sports heavy-duty covers. The pages inside are thick and filled with rich colors and dark blacks. Since SixMoreVodka shot for an heirloom level of quality with these books, they truly feel like tomes of great importance when you hold them in your hand, just from the heft. I figured that probably the best way to give an overview of this book would be to take the role of a traveling guide. We'll follow the roadmap as laid out in the book, but keep in mind I'm going to take you places that no one member of any cult, regardless of rank, could visit in its entirety. By the way, the book itself heavily references cult ranks when describing the vast array of characters in the metaplot. In this video, I'm going to steer around those ranks and try to stick to just identifying any characters by their cult. Just as a fair warning, if you do read The Righteous Fist on your own without first having familiarity with the ranks, you do best to have the core book Primal Punk open as well so you can reference those rank descriptions. Onto the tour. First, We start at the outskirts of the Protectorate. At the
barrier.
north of the so-called Black Lung, the dust-choked region in Borca where the Protectorate sits, is a glacial front that inches south several meters per year. The ice is host to a clan called the Garganti, who ride living mammoths and who threaten to invade the northernmost settlement of Cinder, their intentions completely unknown. The Stukov Desert is a deadly salt plain inhabited by xenophobic nomads, but also has buried underneath its dunes unfathomable wealth in the form of bygone civilization, technology, and scrap. Entire cities underneath the sand wait to be excavated by members of the Scrapper cult, and the desert also holds at least 3 bunkers that contain sleepers, those extremely dangerous pre-programmed operatives who the Paler cult support and follow. Every time even a single sleeper awakens, it causes a lot of trouble. They all have the intent to rewrite all of human existence in a dark, secretive New World Order.
The Reaper's Blow.
The Reaper's Blow is an open gash in the crust of the earth that forms a hard border down the middle of most of Europe. Along its edges are poisonous gases that repel everyone except the truly evil and murderous Cockroach Clan, a clan that in fact poses a clear and present danger to the Protectorate in 2598.
Borderlands.
To the west, Franca is one of the many lands that have been ravaged by the Primer. The Pheromancers, a hive-minded pheromone-powered type of psychonaut, has long dominated this zone, but the more immediate problem for Justitian and the Protectorate is that there has been a war here among non-infected humans, and it has triggered a massive wave of refugees who have gone straight to the capital city. All along the eastern and southern edge of the Protectorate, towns and outposts have fallen to the clans. Meccans, techno-slave lords, who were once driven out of their dark city, have returned. Phosphorites and cockroaches, 2 psychopathic clans numbering in the tens of thousands, have recently formed a dangerous alliance. These clans haven't reached the city walls of Justitian yet, but that tension is as tight as a drum in this moment of the setting's history. And because of the encroachment of the bad clans, anything out past the line in what most people call the wastelands is as deadly as a zone infected with Primer.
The Protectorate.
The history of the Protectorate is long and detailed. 10 solid pages of hard facts, meta plot reveals, and plot hooks for your table. But I'll try to sum it up as fast as I can. Exactly 450 years before the present, in the year 2148, the cult, now known as the Chroniclers, found an old maglev train station and hid there to avoid complete massacre by another cult, the Anabaptists. They, the Chroniclers, hired scrappers to fortify the station, and it became their central cluster, their base of operations, and the seed of the city of Justitian. 250 years later, these chroniclers, who now all wore masks and spoke through vocoders, adopted a new vigilante movement as their own law enforcement arm, giving them a set of laws to carry out as well as a headquarters near theirs. These vigilantes became the cult known as the Judges. The Chroniclers and the Judges formed the Protectorate, a coalition not unlike the Roman Empire in which taxation and obedience was provided to towns and villages in exchange for protection and access to trade. Then about 65 years ago, a medical order known as the Spitalians, who command a mind-bogglingly huge medical complex and who have not only conducted meaningful research on the Primer for centuries, but also participated in centuries of warfare against the Primer and other human factions, cast their neutrality aside and suddenly joined the Protectorate. These 3 cults are successful in spreading the borders and the wealth of the Protectorate for decades, making strides in pushing back Pheromancers in Franca and hostile clans in Borca, and as this happens, the city of Justitian grows and grows, but all along the way they commit atrocities, wiping out entire clans, and in the case of the city of Exalt, an entire competing civilization. By the year 2598, the Protectorate is facing a revitalized clan uprising, as well as enemies in the form of marauders, who are superhuman immortals powered by nanites of the bygone era, but more than anything, it faces a volatile internal political situation where no fewer than 5 different cults vie to either retain or seize control of the city of Justitian and everything it commands.
Bosham.
This was the site of a major victory against the Primer, where the Anabaptist Vincent slayed the grotesque Pheromancer king Markarant, and where still a huge contingent of Anabaptist soldiers called Orgiastics are stationed. The city is not self-sufficient, but it still swells dangerously with refugees fleeing from turmoil in Franca.
Mobilis.
This town is host to power production facilities that have changed hands several times since the fall of civilization as we know it, or the Eschaton. First, it was controlled by sleepers, those cryogenically preserved operatives supported by the Paler cult. It is hinted that back in 2192, they were starting a new dawn for humanity in earnest here, with plans to manufacture combustion engines, genetically modified wheat, advanced nanofibers, and even bioengineered humans. But they were all driven out or executed during a war, and Mobilis ended up run for a while by a gang of scrappers called the Nine Fingers. But after a few years, when the chroniclers in Justitian realized that they needed their electricity source with fewer strings attached, Mobilis was seized by the Protectorate and became an extremely well-guarded asset.
Cinder.
Cinder is the legendary site of where the first judge began executing criminals with his hammer, wearing his long coat and floppy hat, and inspiring a whole cult over time. More recently, a horde of Palers has surrounded the town and decapitated its leadership, using it as a base of operations for getting into the Stukov Desert and finding several bunkers containing their cryogenically frozen brethren.
Newcrest.
Horses in the Protectorate are a treasured asset heavily restricted in use. Only judges and Spitalians are allowed to ride them for the most part, at least inside of Justitian, and they are largely raised and trained here in Newcrest. 400 workers look after nearly 3,000 horses here.
Liqua.
Liqua is one of the more storied cities of the region, being a location of interest due to it serving as a vast source of drinking water. 420 years before the present, 600 elite operatives, the Sleepers, awoke from cryosleep and began planning to rebuild civilization. Soon they found a massive clean water source and established Liqua there. They subjugated nearby clans, indoctrinated them, and resettled them at Liqua to help build the city. They even managed to subjugate and control a nascent chronicler cult. The plan was to find a place called Exalt, and they did find it, but it was already taken over and operated by another people. A little after 2 centuries later, the Sleepers lost control of Liqua. In time, it would become a city under the banner of the Protectorate, but not like any of the other cities. Here, the people live long, healthy lives, and there are no chroniclers monitoring everyone with security cameras. Most importantly, rulership and control of the water wealth doesn't come directly from the laws of the judges, but rather from 4 so-called water lords who each control a culturally distinct zone of the city. Generally speaking, Liqua is the second most diverse and interesting city in the Protectorate next to Justitian, since it is host to so many cults, including the African merchant overclass, the Neo-Libyans, as well as a very powerful Paler who resides there in secret.
Dog's End.
Dog's End is the location of a salt mine that is critical to Justitian, but has a couple of problems. 1, it's a POW labor camp operated under harsh conditions. And 2, it is in the middle of a corpse eater outbreak. If you're not familiar with corpse eaters, they're basically zombies in this setting, their affliction being spread by waterborne parasites and person-to-person transmission.
Harm.
Around here on the east side is Harm, named after the Harmid family, which runs a massive pig farm operation. As with any massive pig farm operation in a gritty apocalyptic setting, there is a massive amount of money involved, criminal activity, and occasionally a body being disposed in the swine pits.
Cavernous.
Cavernous is a gaping wound in the earth that takes the form of a massive strip mine. It produces essential ore and minerals for the Protectorate, but is comfortably controlled by Bosch, the leader of the powerful scrapper gang known as the Cartel.
The Clawin.
It's not easy to gain access to the Clawin, which looks like a normal walled Protectorate village from the outside. On the inside, it's an empty town except for the actors and the dozens of trainee judges and Spitalians who train in urban warfare and crowd control. There is also an experimental warfare unit that tries out new chemical weapons.
Leadfield.
Leadfield is one of several outpost settlements taken by the clans, in this case the Cockroach Clan, a heaving, sweating, greasy, cannibalistic nightmare of a tribe, almost unbelievably grotesque and sadistic.
Gesson.
Despite it being further away from the capital city, Gesson still holds out against the clans. The people here first came for the promise of unclaimed bygone remnants and artifacts, and stayed because of a massive field of scraps and a vast arsenal of reclaimed weapons. But the people are murderously angry with the Protectorate, since it did not come to protect them at the start of this new clan uprising.
Chalk Breach.
Chalk Breach produced limestone in both solid and powder form, which was used in construction for the judges, hygiene for the Spitalians, and fertilizer for the Anabaptists. In a way, it was the most important resource outpost for the Protectorate, yet it was not fortified. and is now surrounded by bloodthirsty cockroach clanners. Its remaining survivors have been holed up for 2 months, waiting for reinforcements from Justitian to come.
The Spital.
The Spital is one of the main pillars of the setting, a sprawling medical and research complex founded by a coalition of physicians very soon after the Eschaton 600 years ago. For centuries, this coalition, who became known as the Spitalians, remained neutral in regional conflicts. Some evidence hints at them working with sleepers early on and researching human bioengineering, but those days are long past. Now, Spital is one leg in the three-legged stool that is the Protectorate, and serves as a massive free hospital for the people in the region. The complex also serves as a training ground for Spitalian soldiers called Famulancers, as well as the seat of their leadership. Each of the different wings of the Spital are host to different disciplines, including epigenetics, sanitation, canon, as well as several branches studying different manifestations of the primer. In most recent years, there has been a crisis of recruitment. Due to the rise of the clans in these so-called clan wars, the Spital is not able to replenish their ranks as fast as they're losing them. It takes years and years of dedicated study and training to produce a Spitalian warrior, and just a moment for them to be slain in battle.
A235.
A single apocalyptic named Chagall has managed to carve out an impregnable fortress in the form of a ruined bridge built on massive pylons. From this easily defensible vantage, he was able to win the favor of the judges by formally joining the Protectorate, and has grown powerful by being able to collect customs and toll fees from anyone he is allowing to pass.
Farapol.
Long ago, Farapol was the industrial and intellectual pride of the erstwhile city-state of Exalt, but when the judges came, the leadership was ruthlessly dissolved, and it eventually became Justitian's first off-site prison camp. Instead of resurrecting the manufacturing might of the city, the leadership in Justitian decided to dismantle Farapol for scrap. The prisoners eventually revolted, and the ruined city fell into the hands of an apocalyptic named Apoc, who devised an undetectable new drug that could replace the primer-laden burn that was recently stamped out of the capital. But eventually, his drug fortress fell to the Protectorate, and his empire was burned to the ground. Now, Farapol is a ghost town, with a small contingent of settlers walled up inside of a tiny compound inside the city. Justitian doesn't send lawkeepers out here, and it's a no-man's land of robbers and cutthroats.
Siege.
In terms of the current moment, at the height of the clan wars, Siege might be where you will see the beginning of the end. It's a heavily engineered fortification settlement that has become all but completely militarized. Just outside its walls are the ravenous clans numbering in tens of thousands. Just inside the walls, war supplies are piled high, and the population has swelled with warriors from all the Protectorate clans. There are even bounty hunters here, untrained farmers, and laborers who have been promised a small fortune if they can collect clanner heads. Those mercenaries are intended as cheap fodder for the inevitable onslaught.
Wetzlar.
You can just tell from Wetzlar's location on the map that it was going to be one of the first places to fall in the clan wars, being so far removed from Justitian. In this case, a clan called the Meccans used toxic gas to eliminate the small contingent of judges guarding the town, and the people here were conquered and enslaved within a day. Just as in Chalk Breach, they await rescue by the Protectorate.
The Eternal City.
Maybe it was inevitable, or maybe things didn't need to be this way, but the city of Justitian, the Eternal City, the Righteous Fist, is run by a vast, heartless bureaucracy and ruled by a vain, petty leader. In this case, the leader, or co-leader, is Supreme Judge Arcot, an aging despot whose rule is now threatened from all sides. The law and the books are presented almost like biblical commandments, and justice is meted out usually with some due process. Most criminals are either temporarily or permanently marked, and some serve hard labor, while a select few are sentenced to death for excessive violence, terrorism, or the crime of reenactment, or the impersonation of a judge. What started off so long ago as the cluster for chroniclers fleeing persecution has expanded into 7 downtown districts and one massive uptown where the seat of government and diplomacy is located. Countless clans have been absorbed into the homogeneous melting pot, oftentimes their own cultures and traditions worn away and forgotten over the centuries. There are public holidays throughout the year that honor one tradition or another, but day-to-day life for most denizens consists of random hygiene inspections, permits for getting in and out of Uptown, or running a merchant stall, or even delivering packages, and the payment of taxes, with a 20% tax upcharge for non-citizens.
The Forecourt.
Let's drop right into the heart of the city, in one of the liveliest spots, the forecourt. Here, there are tens of thousands of merchants every day selling everything imaginable, with traffic jams on foot twice a day as people wait to take one of the 2 massive lifts along the side of the plateau to get up and down from Uptown, which is literally up higher than downtown by about 180 feet.
The steel monolith.
Towering over the forecourt, and really the only noticeable feature from high in the sky, is the steel monolith, a towering arms factory that never stops belching smoke. It is where the judges get their weapons and their leather jackets, and if you're really special, you get to ride on Europe's only floating gondola, which is normally loaded with supplies for the arms factory. The monolith harbors a strange secret. 2 clans have lived inside of it for centuries, prisoners of the Protectorate who have been made to practice their mastery of steel and manufacturing in complete secrecy. They are the descendants of a wayward seafaring expedition from Asia that landed on European shores over a century ago and live now in captive luxury.
Stukov quarters.
To the north is the Stukov quarters, that was once the home of proud early clans such as the Stukov, the Brenny, Deer, Adiki, and Kraw. Half of the clans are gone now, and the rest are represented by a neighborhood council of toothless elderly folks who complain about how they are not honored by the Protectorate. This quarter is also home to dozens of artisan guilds, the prestigious inn, the Garamond, and an oddball museum called the House of Maps that contains countless regional relics and objects of historical interest. Right along the northern edge of the quarter is the Great Northern Wall, which was a boondoggle project launched by Supreme Judge Arcot to repel future invaders. The wall was a catastrophic waste of money and the site of rampant graft and waste. Ultimately, it was cancelled by Arcot, who claimed that Justitian had become too powerful to even need a wall.
The harbor and east
The
side.
harbor is nothing short of a centralized vice district where the apocalyptics operate gambling, prostitution, drug dens, and whatever else you can think of. The drug of choice was burn, but the ruling Spitalians had a problem with that since the burn was literally the primer being inhaled. But even after a great cleanse in which the burn dealers and traffickers were ruthlessly routed from the city, the harbor never did clean up its act. A lot of what keeps the apocalyptics safe from authorities is information. They know a lot about Chronicler's operations and about individual judges and Spitalians, which keeps those authorities from being able or willing to make a full frontal attack on their operations. The east side is just as riddled with apocalyptics, who are organized by flocks. The most powerful flock in the city is the carrion birds, led by an alleged immortal called the Mother of Ravens. This flock is anywhere from 3,000 to 9,000 members strong, and Justitian's leadership has no conceivable way to root them all out. In terms of entertainment, the flock does offer a number of interesting choices. There's Invictus, a tawdry nightclub where the elite of the city, including high-ranking judges, battalions, and even far-flung Helvetics, meet to talk about serious cult-related business. Then there's the Dark Room, where you have to get fully naked before entering a pitch-black room where there is an anonymized orgy taking place. Sometimes people happen to die there for one reason or another. Then there is the much safer Diorama, a bar that features a huge miniature model of the city, along with a guide who explains different parts of the city to you, kind of like what I'm doing now.
Bottomlands.
The Bottomlands is an urban swamp where the subsoil is soaked through, the pipes are broken, and everything is turned to mud. About 50,000 unfortunate souls live here, since there is nowhere else for them to go, and a rogue Spitalian named Elias Raymond heals the sick in secret, a public enemy of the Spitalians for not practicing medicine through sanctioned channels.
The guest quarter.
If you're new to the city without a place to stay, you might find yourself in the guest quarter where public and private housing is provided. The district is also naturally filled with con artists, thieves, and grifters out to take advantage of starry-eyed newcomers. And there's also a thriving black market for exotic stolen and looted goods.
Defiler Street.
Probably the worst place you could find yourself is on Defiler Streets. These are 3 sewage canals fed by thousands of tributaries that carry raw sewage out of the city. Oddly though, they fill with disease, trash, and rats fast enough, but they're only drained once every 3 months. People live around these canals as a last resort and are often bereft of any hope of any kind of future for themselves. One pro tip though, the Defiler Streets are a surefire way of sneaking into the city if you're willing to swim through the broth.
Tech Central.
Tech Central has only loosely defined borders, but one thing is for certain, and that is, this is the realm of the Scrappers. Scrappers are the cult who are out in the hinterlands digging up scrap and bygone artifacts to sell, and who are also in the cities doing the building and a lot of the inventing. They make up the urban workforce, and they reign relatively free of judge and chronicler control here in Tech Central. Who rules here instead is Bosch, the leader of the biggest scrapper gang known as the Cartel. Much of the district is grimy, but the Manufactories is an area that is spotless and pristine, where the most respected inventors and engineers of the city conduct their work and their apprenticeships. You'll also find a massive scrapyard here, where a grand scrap market has emerged, and All walks of life come to find all conceivable kinds of bits and pieces. Here is also home to one of Justitian's greatest wonders, the Gyrodome, a massive orb filled with thousands of coils of copper wire that harvest the static electricity from dust storms, generating energy for the entire district.
A crack.
Several years ago, a section of Tech Central collapsed into the ground, killing 364 and injuring thousands. The site of this disaster became known as the Crack, but instead of allowing scrappers to swarm in and rescue the victims and start reconstruction, the chroniclers erected a security perimeter around the entire site and hired Helvetic sentinels in full heavy-duty armor to guard it. We'll get to why that is in just a bit.
Neighborhood of the Providers.
If we pop over to the northwest of the city, we find the Neighborhood of the Providers, an odd zone that is both a part of the so-called rubble, or fertile outer ring of the city where food is produced, as well as the city proper. Here live bakers, butchers, millers, and the like, most of who are not necessarily wealthy but do have citizenship. They organize themselves into tiny village conglomerates, and their families are referred to as dynasties. More recently, the labor class here has organized into a united force called the Cooperative and made attempts at collective bargaining with the city's rulers.
Cemetery of the Judges.
Over in the northeast, at the Cemetery of the Judges, the judge cult buries all of their dead, or at least the ones whose bodies they can recover. The biggest problem with this place is that the judges don't allow the Spitalians to autopsy any of the bodies and inspect them for sepsis, which means that if one of the corpses is carrying it, the whole zone could bloom into a spore field and become a major problem for the city. Interestingly, the judges do allow autopsies of bodies, but only by their star coroner, Dr. Masser, who is chiefly employed to investigate bodies for signs of suspected crimes. Fielding itself is a clean, cosmopolitan zone for the upper middle class of the city. The real estate is overpriced, and young men buy brides from downtown in a sort of perverse yearly beauty pageant. I think one of my favorite scenes in the book is over at the sanatorium in Fielding. Here, the judges deposit their ailing and aging members to live out the last years of their lives. But the place is run by Spitalians. The Spitalians who work here are trained to spout some philosophy about true immortality being attained only by releasing all of your secrets before you die. The entire operation is run by the Spitalians to pump intel from the judiciary, but under the guise of pure altruism.
Cross Quarter.
Cross Quarter is the district of the Anabaptists, who most recently earned their right to such a presence in the city because of their role in the City Wars, a regional conflict that took place about 150 years before, as well as their aid to Spitalian expeditions. The fact is, the Anabaptists are a religion that produces reliable warriors for the Protectorate. Many of those warriors, or orgiastics, come from all parts of Europe to be housed at a barracks here. The chroniclers hate the Anabaptists for their persecution 400 years before, and they take their grudge pretty seriously, devoting time and energy year-round to steal any Anabaptist child who they deem overly intelligent and raise them as spies to be reinserted into Anabaptist society at some point in the future. As far as life in the quarter, you'll find most of the action at Cross Square, and there's a heavy, pious religious feel in the mornings here. Their most notable structure, naturally, would be their Church of St. Samuel, which oddly enough boasts a turbine engine at the top of its main tower.
Jehomadon Quarter.
The main road into the city, for most travelers, is the Funnel Road, and it leads into the Jehomadon Quarter. Mounted judges split the incoming crowd into different paths, with citizens getting to take a shortcut and all the others going through tedious searches and shakedowns. The Jehomadon Quarter itself is actually a run-down sort of slum. A bombing on the just completed super statue of Supreme Judge Arcot by a terrorist triggered a political ousting of the Jehomadons from the city, and their quarter lies fallow. This quarter is pretty much a ghetto, but the Jehomadons keep themselves clean and tidy. You'll find a butcher's quarter here where there are a lot of goats and other livestock meeting their end, and down south an industrial complex called the Tanneries, where leather and rawhide are produced. The tanneries produce a pretty horrible stench in the area, but it is the biggest source of wealth for the beleaguered Jehomadon community.
Uptown.
On the opposite end of the noxious stink of tanneries, and on the exact opposite side of the city, is Uptown. This is the true core of the city where the chroniclers and judges share their rule in a tense balance. Only the elite live here, the high-ranking cult members who run the city, and the wealthiest of the merchants. It's not exactly the best place to live, though, since the chroniclers monitor every square inch with security cameras and drones. There's virtually no privacy and no personal freedom here.
Calendar Square.
Calendar Square is a clean, open area, but is heavily guarded and monitored, almost like a prison yard. That's a finally finished statue of Supreme Judge Arcot there, in case you were wondering. He likes to think he's the best of all the 23 Supreme Judges who came before him.
Judgment Hall.
It's not easy to gain access to Judgment Hall, the judge's seat of power and the center point of politics and Justitian. It's a massive building, about 100 years old, and it's where the senates make and refine the laws of the empire. It's also home to one of the 2 great museums of the city. The other one is hidden underground in the Chronicler's domain. And the hall also boasts an open theater called the Odeon, which conducts propaganda plays and performances.
The barracks.
You'll also find a barracks here, a big one made up of 6 main buildings, mostly hosts to judges. Since the clan war started, you'll also see a lot of Spitalian preservists, as well as Helvetics stationed here to cross-train and share knowledge.
The offices.
I won't get into it here, but Uptown has a lot of administrative offices. The Office of Hygienics, the Office of Locality, which deals with issuing citizenship to people, the Office of Certification for merchant and other licensing, Office of Culture, Office of Civil Economics. It goes on, just like any boring modern urban government.
Paper factory.
There are really just 2 things you need to know about the paper factory here. 1, it's always running because that vast bureaucracy we talked about, it uses a lot of paper. And 2, they use the clothing of dead people to make the paper. It's a whole process, but that's what they do here.
Ambassador Quarter.
There are diplomatic houses or complexes for the Spitalians, Anabaptists, Neo-Libyans, Helvetics, and even the Newmancers, a clan that is teetering on the edge of being at war with the Protectorate. Each of these buildings has a different flavor to it that reflects the culture of the ambassador's homeland. Naturally, the Spitalian embassy, Cransler's Villa, is built like a no-nonsense war bunker.
The central cluster.
The story of the chroniclers and of Justitian started right here at this abandoned maglev terminal. 400 years ago, right after the Anabaptists ran them out of Cathedral City, they found themselves here. They hired scrappers to fortify the place, and a lot of people think that this surface level is the central cluster, the beating heart of the chronicler cult. But actually there are 6 more levels below the surface. Level 1 is the terminal, where the chroniclers really do conduct work, including training and recruitment. But then there's level 2, the hangar, where they are handling metric tons of bygone artifacts that they buy up from the scrappers from all over the continent. This level is a labyrinth of galleries and staircases and cranes moving freight containers of techno junk all over the place, all the time. Level 3 is the network, where chroniclers are doing the exhausting work of watching security cameras and analyzing surveillance data. Their intention is to collect data in order to restart the stream, a sort of internet from the past that they think harbors the first artificial life. At level 4 is the Conclave, where chroniclers have access to a secret underground railway system that gives them access to dozens of secret entry points around the city. More on that in a minute. Level 5 is the mainframe, and this is essentially why the entire chronicler cult exists in the first place. This is where the highest ranking among them sit on floating platforms and chairs in a swirl of holographic displays and crackling Tesla coils, trying to figure out the ultimate truth of the stream. They want to restore the internet basically, but the internet from the year 2073, the stream, which was a network so advanced that with a bump from a mysterious computer virus, they think it attained true self-awareness. They want to resurrect that artificial intelligence, and everything else to the chroniclers is just a stepping stone to get there. Moving on to level 6 is the inventory, where the best and most valuable of their scrap haul is located. They have hoarded so much of it that they don't even have enough manpower to look through all of it and analyze it. This is one of the 2 great museums that I mentioned, although it's not exactly a museum. And finally, at level 7 is the Orb, the actual mainframe computer that is doing all the calculations for the cult's main objective, hosting their so-called static stream. Like any building-sized computer, it takes a lot of energy. The chroniclers have moved heaven and earth to secure that steady electricity from the Mobilis settlement. Most of that juice gets burned up right here in the Orb. They have so much faith in this computer and what it's doing that they throw the dead bodies of their highest ranking members into the furnace-like core of the thing, believing that the deceased mind will be absorbed into their static stream, a network which, for the record, is a poor simulacrum of the actual stream that went offline 600 years ago.
Underground.
Back to level 4 in that underground railway system, when the chroniclers found this network, they did everything they could to keep it a secret, and it was largely a success. They use it to zip around the city and pop in and out without anyone the wiser. They're able to hide their exits in all kinds of ways and use biometrics and keys and passcodes, including their barcode on their head, to secure the actual access doors and hatches. Remember the crack in Tech Central where the ground collapsed and hundreds died, but the chroniclers walled up the whole accident site? That's because the sinkhole revealed the existence of their underground network, and they had to take drastic action to cover it up. Not even the battalions or the judges know about this thing. There are a couple of exceptions to no one knowing about the network, though. The first is the Apocalyptics. They're also secretly underground dwellers, and pretty much know that the Chroniclers have this. But between the two cults, there's an unspoken stalemate where neither will expose the other in order to preserve their own secret. The other exception to no one knowing is Exit C3. There is a whole branch occupied at this very moment by almost 100 heavily armed Palers. These operatives snuck into the city with the intent of infiltrating the central cluster and ended up barricading themselves here. The only thing that was able to contain them at first was the Chronicler's Guard Sentinel, the Kriegsmaschine 6. This robot actually comes with a stat block and a huge list of deadly high-tech attacks in case you want to roll the dice against it.
Nest of the carrion
Besides the
birds.
secrets of the Chroniclers, there's actually one other big reveal tucked down under the city. Deep down, where there is nothing but murky sewage canals and thick toxic air, the Mother of Ravens herself is headquartered. This woman has been leading the carrion birds, the biggest and most successful flock of the Apocalyptics, for ages. Some people think that she has somehow gained immortality. It's true that she is the leader of the carrion birds and that she has lived a very long time in that role, maybe even for centuries, but she's not a god. Her trick to a very long life has been her son Joshua, who was born a psychonaut, a Homo Degenesis, specifically a biokinetic. In the case of Joshua, he's chained up in a dark laboratory deep underground, made to extract the life essence of live humans. And when the Mother of Ravens and Mother of Joshua needs that life essence every so often, he violently transfers some of it to her in a process that, in fact, extends her life. Other than that, the Mother of Ravens is, as you might have guessed, an eccentric, ruthless, and very clever leader.
Enemies of the state.
The last dozen or so pages of that book gives you 8 possible bounties, each one a kind of colorful criminal or another, then a deeper reveal of the 4 enemy clans, the Cockroaches, Phosphorites, Meccans, and Inamoi. Notably here, you get stats and descriptions of different ranks within each cult, so as a GM, you can compose a dynamic encounter with these clans. Unlike Psychonauts, your players stand a decent chance of prevailing against a clanner, generally speaking. Alright, here are my thoughts on Degenesis Justitian Book 1, The Righteous Fist. Index. I actually found the internal organization of the book to be perfectly logical and readable, and I used that organization as the basis for this video's progression. But it would have been nice to see a cross-reference reflected in the form of an index at the end of the book, because once you start getting into Degenesis, the details matter, not just for the setting itself, but the metaplot. There are only 2 ways around a lack of index, and that's to memorize the book's contents generally, or use the find function on the PDF. The PDF is conveniently bookmarked, so that can help a lot as well. Going against canon. The setting details are great, but then there's the metaplot. I love the story that is told in the form of the metaplot, but it's a double-edged sword for the GM because on one hand it presents NPCs and history and ongoing strife of one kind or another for you to plug right into with your own players, but on the other hand it can close off a lot of avenues for storytelling because going off the well-beaten main story path means going against the setting's canon. Personally, I advocate that GMs do whatever they want to do with the world of Degenesis and bend or break the metaplot to fit the story that they and their players want to tell. But there is certainly a cohort of Degenesis adherents out there who will say that I wouldn't be playing Degenesis anymore. And I understand that argument as well. By staying within the fence lines of the metaplot, you retain access to a shared story. I think my point is there's a lot of official micro events that happen in the Degenesis setting, and that's a part of its identity and appeal, but that's all the more canon that you as a GM have to at least consider remembering when forging your own campaign. The printed books. First and foremost, it's worth noting again that the printed version of The Righteous Fist, as it comes in the 2-book Justitian slipcase set, is about as high quality as you can get in a book. Stitch-bound, heavy paper, rich, smooth colors, and the heavy-duty slipcase just screams quality. At the time of this video, these books are suddenly a very coveted item due to SMV's cancellation of the game. I put a link below to their website where you can check and see if you can own a piece of RPG history. Readability is high. I can't recall a single page in this book where my eyes glazed over from the writing. This book is written with a crystal clear tone that conveys information in an interesting way without being unduly mysterious. You still get the thing where it swings from hard exposition to some NPC talking to you in vernacular and back again, but that just makes it even more fun to read, to be honest. The setting runs deep and the plot thickens. As I mentioned a minute ago, the setting of Degenesis itself and its ever-evolving story are closely intertwined. The book's core rulebooks start you in 2595 AD, and this book takes place in 2598, 3 years later. These years are filled with events and regional shifts in power and influence that are fascinating because the powers that be are so well described. Even though Degenesis presents unique faction concepts in each of its cults and clans and throws them all together into a boiling pot of empire and intrigue, the author does all of the heavy lifting for you in terms of fleshing that stuff out. If it boiled down to one very difficult question, what would happen if a mid-apocalypse megacity was shared by a techno-fascist regime, a medical autocracy, and a judicial totalitarian, then you would actually get a very detailed answer, fully illustrated here. It's a game book. Despite my misgivings about running afoul against canon, the book itself never forgets that it's meant to be a supplement to a role-playing game. Most pages contain at least one plot hook or mystery for GMs to latch onto and build something out of: the artwork. As you've seen in this video, the illustrations included in the book are eye-popping. There's hardly any abstraction with the imagery. They serve more as semi-photographic snapshots of a lived-in world, which is a style that pairs well with the immense amount of detail written to accompany them. The PDF is free. You can grab The Righteous Fist and all of the other Degenesis books for free in digital form from their website or from DrivethruRPG.com. I would also recommend, if you do decide to give this book a read, to download the maps of the area as well. It's nice to have the maps alongside as reference when reading, since the geography is heavily referenced. The city of Justitian, area-wise, is really just a sliver of the world of Degenesis which has survived the Eschaton, yet is host to so many details of the setting. The city itself, as well as the 20 or so major locations of the Protectorate, are where a lot of the cults converge, essentially all competing for either resources or outright domination. Make sure to watch the next video in the series where we go even further down the rabbit hole of the big city itself, through probably the greatest NPC compendium ever made. That's all I've got for now. Thanks for watching. See ya.